Hello, hello. Hello. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Love Books. Lovely to have you all here tonight, and thank you so much for coming. It's absolutely lovely to have Azille Coetzee at Love Books again. We last had her here for the launch of her memoir, In My Fell, A Race, which is a wonderful, accessible, and relatable memoir about identity and belonging. And I, as an English speaker, managed to get through quite a bit of it, but it would have taken me a very long time to finish it. She followed this up with a novel, Die Teenoorgesteldes is Net So Waar, which is about female friendship and sexuality. And now, with Desire at the End of the White Line, she's moved into academic territory, which is where she belongs. But I must say, she still retains that easy, accessible writing style. And her opening paragraph is all about explaining feminism around the braai. And I promise you it's going to have you in stitches. So congratulations, Azille. It's lovely to have you here, as I've said. Just a little bit about Azille. She's a postdoctoral researcher in gender and decolonization at the Center for Historical Trauma and Transformation, which is at Stellenbosch University. She also has a PhD in philosophy from the Free University of Amsterdam and one from Stellenbosch University. Chatting to Azille tonight is Christi Kruger. Lovely to have you here tonight, Christi. Thank you. Christi is also an academic. She's an anthropologist and the acting director at the Centre for Sexualities, AIDS and Gender, which is at the University of Pretoria. And over to the two of you.
Thanks so much, Kate, and thanks for everyone who's here. I just want to correct my affiliation is research fellow at philosophy at Stellenbosch. The other one is done already, so just for technical purposes. Okay.
Azille is quite promiscuous in a disciplinary way.
Only in disciplinary way.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for being here. And thanks to Azille for inviting me. I think we have a very curious relationship in the sense that we've known each other for very, very long, but we've only met each other in person twice, today being the second time. So it's really lovely to be here. And I think it's quite exciting to finally see a book of yours come out that's more academically oriented. Although, as Kate said, I think it's still quite accessible. I think many conventional academics might frown upon the style. So I thought it would be a good starting point to maybe start by asking you if you could sort of talk us through the idea behind the book and the sort of main themes itself. I know this is a project that's been in the making for a very long time. So maybe to set the scene a bit before we delve in.
Sure, and thanks for being here, Christi. I really, Christi is one of the famous Mannetjiesvrou lesbians who you must listen to their podcast. It's Mannetjiesvrou, and it's a exploration of white Afrikaner lesbian identity in South Africa, and it's just fabulous. And so, but I've known Christi forever through friends, but it's so nice to have you here. Thanks. Okay, so the book started for me with a question that I've been asking in my other books too, but a question that if you are white in South Africa, also white in Afrikaans, but any other kind of white, you're probably asking it too, or you might be asking it, is why haven't we changed more yet? So it's 30 years after the ending of apartheid, and we really thought that our lives would be looking differently now. We thought that, I don't know, I had this idea that I live in Cape Town and the city is extremely segregated. I don't know if my life looks so much different than from my mother's life while she was living during apartheid, necessarily in the day-to-day, what it looks like when I walk into a restaurant, etc., etc. And also this white Afrikaanness is still a very privileged position in society. That hasn't changed, and it seems like the disparity between the privilege that we have and the lack of it that other people in South Africa have is still growing. So it's this very privileged position, but at the same time, it's a position that I find very oppressive as women specifically. and as a woman, so it's an identity that you can sit pretty in it, as Christi van der Westhuizen says. But if you don't follow those scripts, I'm not getting married, I'm not planning on having children, I feel very gay many days of the week. And so then you don't have the scripts that you can follow that take you, that show you your future basically in this identity. And it's a very alienating experience. So, and also, so if you're Afrikaans and you are familiar with the popular culture, if you switch on the television, Afrikaans culture is all about the marriage plot. Most of the books, except the radical feminist literature, I would say, but it's about television shows. It's about the brothers and the father and the farm and the wives and the children that they're going to have. So you see it all around you. The culture. It's on the cover of the magazines. Who's getting married to who has the new baby. So you see it everywhere. These scripts are so tightly programmed into our social fabric that if you don't fall into it, you're a bit lost in it. So what the work of the book has been for me is to connect, to actually start seeing the connections between these two questions. Why is our whiteness not changing? It's because in our bodies, in the way we live our lives in the most intimate ways, in the ways that feel the most personal, we are still adhering to the very old scripts and rules of this identity. What I mean by that, and this is not new, there's so much research done on it by feminist historians. South African or white Afrikaner identity has always been structured, and the kind of the ordering logic of it, the architecture of it, is in terms of the nuclear family, and it's a nuclear family that is compulsory, reproductive, compulsory heterosexual. And we can think this very easily. If you need a white folk, a white nation, you need white babies to be born, and you need them to be raised in a way that is properly white and Afrikaans into the culture. And then also the little family, the idea of the bloodline that extends through these family structures is what tethers us to the land as a people, because now, as a settler people specifically, because now we can say, no, God gave me this land through the eersgeboortereg, rule of primogeniture. It's passed on between father and son in a way that's biblical. So all of these, our white settler identity in so many ways depend on these narratives and structures of the nuclear family. And white women play white Afrikaner women play a very specific role in this, because the men can actually go off and do whatever they want with anyone, but if the women do it, as soon as white women turn away from the white Afrikaans men towards black men or towards other women or queer people, they're not having the white babies, then the whole project is lost. Or they're not raising those white babies in the proper Afrikaner way, the project is lost. So the entire project of Afrikaner whiteness depends upon the white woman doing what she must, staying in place basically in these structures. And that is why there's so much anxiety around our sexual identity in the culture, how there is still, we don't see depictions of female queerness, or we are, as a culture, we started to get used to the idea of the gay man, but there's still almost no, if you are not falling in the category of the trouvrou, then you don't see depictions of yourself in popular culture, or very rarely. So all of this said, in the book, I then ask, what possibilities open up for my identity, for my whiteness, if I, as white Afrikaner woman, start refusing these scripts handed to me, or these, or contested at least? What if I use the energy and time that we tend to invest in the white Afrikaner family, that we tend to put into the white husband and the white baby, and I put it somewhere else? I put it in the project of finding some kind of belonging, and I know this is also a complicated idea, but kind of belonging and making myself useful in networks that are not centered around land and whiteness, but bigger collectivities, other kinds of intimacies, socialities, structures that are not just organized around white genealogy and white reproductivity and its place on the land, but with other women, with other queer people of all races. What happens, what possibilities open up for me and the way that I embody my race if I start living my gender and my gendered embodiment and sexuality in a different way. And of course, it has its limitations, which we'll talk about, but that's the question. So that was a long introduction. Sorry.
Thanks, Azille.
It's because I had a glass of red wine and now.
I'm a terrible sort of traditional interviewer because immediately I want to sort of get into the conversation. But I'm going to limit because I have several things that I want to ask. But before we get to that, so one of the ways in the book in which you sort of do this as an approach is it's in the title, you talk very directly about desire, right? And so I think we've seen this idea of the family, the nuclear family, kin, quite often, right? People have spoken about the idea of the Afrikaner family and it's tied to land. And I think this week, in fact, we saw it again because in reply to Trump's invitation for Afrikaners to become refugees, we saw AfriForum immediately turn around and say, no, this is our birthland, right? So you saw that idea of we were born, it's our heritage, it's our right, come in. What I've not seen, though, is that idea of family tied in with sex and desire, and that is something that you do. And so I wanted you, in general, wondered if you could talk us a bit through this idea, because it seems to me that in the past, people have actually kept family and sex apart quite a bit, right? There's been the idea of the family, and that's portrayed outwards, but sex has been private. And then in this book, you speak about it quite publicly and quite personally, I think. So I wondered if you could sort of maybe talk us through that particular approach. I imagine that it's a difficult decision to arrive at, to reflect so intimately on your own life.
Yeah, thank you. And I will start my answer by saying a few things about desire. So I think also why we don't tie the idea of family to sex that often is because sex means only one thing. In this, sex looks a certain way, or sex is kind of not that relevant even if your sexuality is so directed towards one course and one kind of life, then there's a way in which we don't even have to speak about sex. But desire is interesting in the sense that we tend to think of desire as this thing that is so personal. It is just what it is, and that it's some true version of ourselves. But what scholars are exploring more and more is how desire is political. It's so, like we get trained into wanting certain things, and then you think so. It's not a coincidence that certain kind of bodies are deemed more desirable than others. These things are political. So rather than thinking of desire as something that sits in our bones in some kind of unpolitical way, we must think, and this is the work of Amia Srinivasan also, we must think of desire as something that is deeply political, and for that we have to question who we want and why we want them. But then there is also something about desire that does kind of escape political conditioning, that does, we all know it. You look at someone that you didn't expect to do something in your, and then you feel something, and the powerful thing about desire is because it's such a force, it has world-making capacity. Sometimes you're willing to change your whole life because you feel this thing that you feel, comes from nowhere almost. So, And desire also determines how we occupy space. Because and this is Sarah Ahmed's work, who you are oriented towards determines where you will move and how you will move there. It will determine who you turn towards, who you turn away from. So in a way, it makes your world. So that's why desire is spatial also, and it determines how we can be on this land that we claim ours and who you are there with. Okay, but so for me to write about, and I'm starting to blush even as I speak about this, but really writing about it personally. So the book is, through the book, I weave personal vignettes and fragments that are not necessarily literally true, all of them. I see it more as a kind of, a literary exercise, but a storytelling also too. And the reason why I decided to include my embodied reality into the book is also because I've seen it so many times. People will say, especially with gender stuff, people will say, oh no, that's not applicable to me. I am fully liberated. I'm in control of my life. And then you tell them a story, and then it would be like, oh, the exact same thing happened to me last week. Now I understand. So, and then people can find the anger that I feel also in themselves. And it's just a way of, because this is theory, but it is about how, the question I'm asking basically is, how should I live in a very real, very embodied way? So in that sense, but I did consider a few times just taking all of it out, because I stressed so much about, like, I'm going to be slut-shamed in rapport and whatever. But that hasn't happened. So I don't know if it's still going to happen or if people are. But so far, everyone who's written about the book and has spoken about it has been really kind of respectful, almost too careful. Like, people don't raise the personal parts of the book as if they're really like granting me that. So it's been interesting, but we'll see what happens with it still. But so far, yeah, and I am glad I included it, because I feel if I didn't, then, because for me, these questions I'm asking are also really interwoven with the decisions of who I get into bed with, like in a very real way. So I feel the book needs that to do what I wanted to do.
Thanks, Azille. And it's fascinating, isn't it? Because, I mean, I think this is a question that you've been asking for many years, going back to In My Fell. But this is the first time you're posing it, I guess, to a wider audience. Because of the fact that you chose to write it in English. We were talking earlier, and I said it's very interesting, the writing style, and I hope all of you buy the book so that you can see, because it's biased, because it's in English, but it's written in I think, and you also address this sort of in the introduction. It's written in a way that's very Afrikaans, and that's very embedded in the everyday life of Afrikaans culture. I guess, the sort of cultural products you use throughout the book, novels, movies, film, television, to sort of unpack these ideas. So I thought, let's stay with desire for a moment, because I think there's a lot around desire, right? So you've talked us through how, we've been politicized, we've been taught, in a sense, I guess it's in our habitus, to think that desire is something spontaneous. I guess that's my word, that's not yours. That just happens, it's just magic. But in fact, we've all been oriented to find something desirable or not. And I find it interesting that you raise it sort of in relation to the way in which whiteness operates. Because I think historically, when we talk about race and desire, it's often been around transgression, right? Sort of around the idea of, most prominently, I suppose, the other, sort of the hidden desires of people. And I think that is a fascinating way to sort of think about it. I also thought, as you were speaking now, something really fascinating about desire is that, in a sense, I wonder if desire is still desire if it's achieved, right? Like it almost feels like part of the excitement is that it's not quite attainable. And that makes me wonder what happens. I mean, maybe you can talk to that idea. What happens to your own relationship with desire when you spend years unpacking it theoretically? Like, does it become demystified, I suppose?
I would say I've just been mired in it. Well, I've really just been more awake to it and more really asking myself what I want and why I want it. And then, but it's like food also, you know, when you don't eat, you don't get hungry, and it's the same thing. When I feel my desire multiplies, the more I'm busy with it, the more I feel it. So it's been such a nice process also writing the book. And then people ask, what are you writing about now? And I would say desire, and then I would have long conversations with people about what they desire. So it's just been, I still feel I'm not done with it in a way, but I'll see where I take it. But yeah, what do you feel about desire?
I don't know if I've thought about it enough. I mean, I don't know. I sort of feel like I don't want to unpack it as much as you did. I think that might be a little bit of a buzzkill. I wanted to.
Don't know, eh?
I wanted to ask this later, but you sort of like open it up. And so a lot of the book you spend thinking about heteronormativity. It feels like, again, this is me imposing words. It's not, but about the idea of the white nuclear family, about what is respectable, the expectation that we ought to have children and raise them in a particular way. We should have those children with a particular person within a marriage, all of these things. And it made me wonder sort of about queer people's complicity, right, in whiteness and upholding it. And the fact that obviously it's not only women who have sex with men who are complicit in upholding these structures. And how do we think about that, and how do we start to break it down? That's more of I don't know if it's a direct question. It's sort of more a reflection of why I don't want to think about desire right now, because I prefer to think that I'm blameless in this. The question I did want to come to next, Azille, is that I think oftentimes, at least in my own experience, when people sort of ask, I remember when I did my PhD and people said, what are you working on? And I said, I'm interested in South African whiteness and thinking about whiteness in South Africa in particular. The question was, why? Why is this relevant? Like, why should we spend more time thinking about white people when, so much of South African history and, the thought history of South Africa has been around white people? And so that's the sort of question I want to put to you, because I'm curious about what you would say is, so why do we have to think about this?
So I say this almost at every interview about the book, because I get this question, and it's important that I get this question because it is.
But people
so
obviously
important.
don't listen because they keep asking it.
No, but I think it's a conversation that must always be part of any conversation about a book like this. And I would say there are more important things than whiteness to think about, and more important things to research. And this is definitely not the most important thing at all. But in the same breath, I do think we haven't, as white South African people and white Afrikaans people specifically, we haven't been doing the work. Everyone else have been doing a lot of work. We've been going on in our, continuing in our little lives with our families and our nice white neighborhoods. And we cut ourselves off from so much. I don't know, maybe your families are different and your lives are different, but that's what I see in my life and the circles I move in my family. And we've cut ourselves off from these questions because we are in a privileged position not to think about it. And yeah, for me, it is the question, really the question, asking about whiteness, how should I live my whiteness, what must I do about this whiteness, is the very immediate question of how should I live my life? What should I do today when I get out of bed or when I get into bed or whatever, depending on where you are in the desire conversation. But it is that question of, and that is a very important question for me. So it's not, in the bigger scheme of things, it's not the most important research topic, but for things that I can write about, it's almost the most important thing. And then also I would say, we cannot expect, I mean, we want the world to change. We want a different kind of world. And if white people don't change, the world is not going to change enough because white people still hold so much power, so much privilege. So if we want the world to change, whiteness must change. So this question is also important more broadly, even if it's not directly important. It's part of reimagining our world. So yeah, I would say it is and it isn't important.
I think it's very important. I think it's a privilege to not see yourself as the subject that's being interrogated and sort of like torn apart, right? And white people, I think in South Africa, aren't used to that. They often think they're used to it, but I don't think we are. And that's quite a privileged position to not see yourself objectified almost in that way, isn't it? So the one thing that I really enjoyed about the book, and it's simply because of my own interests, is your thinking about this notion of the volksmoeder and her relationship to, I guess, reproducing whiteness in a sense, right? And I find it such a complicated and layered idea, especially for people who find themselves in relationships with men or who find themselves wanting to have biological children, because I imagine that must be a sort of conundrum, like how do you speak to that part of your own desire whilst not falling into these tropes of sort of reproducing the folk in a way.
Yeah, so I think the first thing to say is that, and it's an important explanation to give, I think, is that I am not saying women should not have children or we should not care for the children we have. Of course not. I think what I'm getting at there also is this. The nuclear family is a privatizing and an individualizing structure. It turns you inward towards this. The child becomes the most important thing in a very individualized sense. And this is what apartheid has been about. It's about care for our own, care for what is your own child and not anyone else's child. And we can. So I think what I'm getting at is, what if we put all of this energy and all of this care work and this, much more about the volksmoeder history than I do, but I think something that I learned from your podcast, is also what the white Afrikaner woman is so good at, also in her historical role as moeder van die volk, mother of the nation, is like hardcore care work and is caring for people and is making sure that everyone is okay around her and doing that work. And she does it so well. She's so strong and she's so, like, she can solve problems. She can do all of the things. And I think what I'm getting at is that, or what I'm pushing myself also, and this, we can talk now about my own complicity and the just the total contradictions in my own life, but the kind of utopian horizon I'm working towards is this idea that, what if we would put all of this energy and this work and this, just these fantastic kind of affordances that our history as our lineage of volksmoeders gives us, and we put it into communities. We ask not only about my own child, but also about other children, to expand that, to make that the reach of that work bigger, to say, who am I caring for when I do my care work, and who am I not caring for? And also, what are the contradictions there? So, yeah, so I think there's a lot. I'm also not saying as Afrikaner women we are like inherently, but I think a lot of what we have are good qualities, but I think they're just misdirected at the moment only to the white man and his children.
Right. Maybe we can even get men to care eventually for
Yeah,
children.
imagine that.
But I think it's interesting, sort of the last thing you said around that it's good qualities, because for me, and this is such a stark reminder to write for me, this is horrible, to spend
You
like
must
years
write,
thinking about
Christi.
things and then be like, so on the podcast you once did. But anyway, so this idea that it's a good quality, right? Because I feel like that is how the Afrikaner woman has been something. The word escapes me now. But she's made less dangerous almost, because the way historically she's been portrayed is she means well. It's misdirected.
So well,
Shame.
yeah.
She's a bit racist, but shame, she actually cares and she does try, and she has a lot of these things. And in fact, it's not very desirable. The historical Afrikaans of like white Afrikaner woman is not an object of desire. It's someone with like, I don't know, like big forearms who like raises 19 children, and she cares for the farm. I can hear my accent slipping when I'm talking about this. It's very interesting. She cares for the farm, and in that way, she's quite dangerous, I think, because unlike the man who's sort of outright about his political intentions, especially in the mid 20th century, the woman is portrayed as, she's just there to care for people. And I think for many of us, those of us who are white and Afrikaans, or who have even family, I've heard this from English-speaking white people as well, these are sort of the mythologies that we are told. And I think that's quite dangerous in a sense, and it's one of the reasons perhaps why we should think about it.
You mean because she is actually exercising so much power, but in this like seemingly innocent, powerless way? Yeah.
I mean, I think oftentimes the relationship between women and their sons, especially, I mean, the daughters are groomed in a different particular way. And you write about this, right? The way in which you are taught to perform your femininity in a particular way. And the kind of woman that you ought to become, the expectancies. But I think there's a difference, almost at times incestuous, it feels, relationship with sons, because they are supposed to become the next leaders. But my question before I started rambling about this was, I wanted to talk about these historical ideas and desirability, because I do find it interesting that, to me at least, the idea of the volksmoeder is not sexy. I don't think a lot of people
That's
think
why
like
you must explore your
desires. However, what I wanted to say about her is that I think in part it's not that people have never desired or explored their desirability. I think people have always. It's that it's been hidden, right? And those of us who grew up in rural areas on farms know the many stories of, there's always, I always think it's sort of the same story probably about, about a child being born who is either too dark or too light. And so, for me, that is part of the story. It's not that we've not explored our desirability. It's perhaps that people like yourself is starting to change the way in which we speak about it, and that it's, I guess, for some people, becoming more acceptable to say who they desire. and to act on that. Whereas before, it's been hidden. It's behind closed doors. It's, it's someone gets sent away for a bit and then they come back.
Yeah, because it threatens the white line, just like queerness. It turns the white woman away from her white procreative, like the project of white genealogy, which ties her people to their land. And so everything is at stake. And so desire is the most potentially disruptive, dangerous thing there is if she looks where she's not supposed to be looking. So at the same time, and I think I should also explain this here, of course, the argument of the book is not that we can change, that who I sleep with or not sleep with will change the world. Like, of course, we cannot rezone South Africa through, like, I don't know, individual sex acts. That's not it.
Actually, apartheid thought we could.
That's true.
And they were quite successful.
Yeah, that is true. And that's the interesting thing of how these things work individually and structurally. Because in the end, who we are making families with, who we are sleeping with, determines who we are living with and who we care for. And that makes the whole of society. So it is this weird interplay between what is individual and what is structural. And it's also the thing of, the change is also not just to change who we are sleeping with, who we are not sleeping with, but changing the world so that who we have sex with and don't have, so that these things can mean different things. At the moment, if you get to be with if you are a woman and you end up and you perform your femininity correctly, you are, I don't know, to conform to it aesthetically and all of the other ways, then you can catch yourself a nice rich white man maybe with a farm, maybe with a house in the middle of Cape Town, whatever.
I'm not sure if you know this, Azille, but there's actually a TV show about that.
See, it's which one? Boerse Vrou. Is that the one or is there another one?
I think there's more than one actually.
Okay, well, I'm thinking Boerse Vrou. That is the show, yeah, and it does the longest running show on Afrikaans television. It's like 16 seasons now or something, and it's a hit. So, but that's our story. But so the difference between being with a white man and not being with a white man is often the difference between having land and landlessness, literally. So who you sleep with, how you perform your femininity determines whether you can have land. Obviously you can have a super successful career and there are other ways in which you can do it. But the point is, like, these gendered sexual decisions really determine a lot of what's going. So it's also about, and you asked me earlier about class when we were speaking in the car, it's also about changing the world so that getting hitched with the white Afrikaner man is not your surest way to having a house, like that kind of thing. No, but it's, I don't know.
And it's
maybe
true because I do not own anything and I don't have a man.
Yeah, because you don't have a man. Yes, no, but and so many, I can draw the line between my queer friends and how they are living, the kind of communal life setups they have to figure out just to, like, get through the month, and my straight friends who are sitting pretty with their husbands. So it's, it's really, it is. So for me, the question is also, the thing is also about changing the world so that whether you are okay or not in your life does not depend upon who you're having sex with or who your parents are. So it's about building structures of care that transcend these nuclear family logics. And that's how I get into family abolition theory that I use from. But yeah, so there's this very complicated interplay between these very personal decisions and these bigger structural questions.
And I think it's so interesting. I was thinking about this last night when I thought about our conversation, and I thought it's interesting how, in a very, I'm not going to name theorists now because I'm scared of getting it wrong, and I'm aware of the fact that it's being recorded. I'm sure people have written about this, right? But how one can grow up to be conditioned to genuinely find that desirable, right? Which is, I suppose, what you get at in the book, right? Is that it's not a fake it's not a calculated decision, I'm sure. I know too many people who've married rich white men who I know genuinely find them desirable, but I suppose that is what's sort of posed, right, as this is what is desirable.
And you don't I didn't ask questions about my desire until a few years ago. Desire is not a question you ask. Mm-hmm. You get socialized so strongly in one track, in one way of being.
Because I think it's a desire, like pleasure, is sort of put into the category of that's very personal, that's very private, and so don't even think about it on your own. Just leave it. Unless you are transgressing, then suppress it. like leave and suppress. I'm aware of the fact that I did not bring a watch. And I don't want to talk too long. What's the two? Okay, so we can still go a little bit, and then maybe, because I still have more questions, and this is the privilege of having the mic. So I want to get to this question of class. Because when I think about Cape Town, which is very firmly where this book is situated, right, it almost feels like it couldn't have been written. I suppose it could have been written in Joburg or Pretoria or Durban, but not in the particular
it's
way
a Cape Town novel,
that it's written. And it seems that class plays such a big way in how we uphold these positions, these societal positions that we occupy, right? Because if you have the money to afford rent in a suburb that is leafy and green and has the security and I don't know, like the places people live, by the nature of South Africa's sort of untransformedness, in a city like Cape Town, you are bound to be surrounded by more white people. Whereas I find that in sort of working class people, like a lot of that whiteness has been deconstructed already, because you don't have the privilege to sort of choose to live in a racially segregated area, to choose to go to a school or to send your children to a school that is sort of still very firmly in apartheid territory. And so I guess my question is, what do we do? Because you also don't want to be that person who sort of hides privilege in a sense, right? Who in a disingenuous way goes and lives in a suburb, that is, I don't know, crime-ridden or perceived, differently. So my question, I guess, is if the question you start with is, or the question you sort of come at is, how do I live? Then I guess the summative question towards the end should be, so how do we live? How do we all live as people embodying, different versions of white Afrikanerness, who have different desires and who move through life differently. And yet, if we look at the South African landscape, it seems that we all move through life very much the same, because we remain closed and, away and segregated. I don't know if that's the next book, because that's what I would have said.
Well, just a quick comment, and then we can go over to questions. But of course, the question of class, and you also know more about this than I do, but the question of class is so deeply entangled with the question of Afrikaner identity, because the project of apartheid was to get Afrikaners into comfortable middle-class life, to uplift them from poverty and to make sure they are okay, while through exploiting everyone else. And a major part of apartheid work was to make sure that the white Afrikaner, to uplift the Afrikaners in a class. There are reports written on this. I write about it in the book. It's literally history. It sounds as if I'm making it up, but there are reports written about how to uplift the Afrikaner into middle class status, which would ensure proper whiteness. And that's the project of apartheid for the Afrikaner. The Afrikaner must live in proper nuclear families and procreate in proper ways and live segregated. So it is always the project of getting the Afrikaner into middle class is always the project of disciplining the Afrikaner into white reproductive heterosexuality, nuclearity, and starting to think outside of these structures, open up. So when we today start to try to think outside of nuclear, when I ask, can I open my whiteness by starting to think myself in networks that transcend the nuclear family, then that is, I feel, inherently also a question of, that opens up possibilities of class, more class integration. Because why are we so stuck in our white neighborhoods? Because we want our children to go to the school with the other, it's all of these things are so, the familial politics are so entangled with the class politics, as it has always been. So, but of course, I speak from a position of huge privilege, and it's something I cannot get around, and it's something I'm not trying to hide. I'm also very explicit about it in the book. It is what it is where I am, and obviously that limits it gives me blind spots. It limits what I can imagine, what I can say. Of course, it affects the work. But yeah, all I can hope for is to get to a point where my life starts to look differently and I don't even know if these last questions are so complicated to answer, but I do believe that everything I'm saying really goes along with the idea that our class structures should be destabilized in South Africa, and especially for us as white Afrikaner people. Yeah, so that was not a good answer to your question, but it was an attempt.
No, I think it was a great answer. It sort of also got me thinking how we didn't even get to speaking about the sort of the, I guess, historical impetus that all of this came from, right? Which is the precarious position of Afrikaner white people in relation to English-speaking white people and sort of Victorian morality. Lest we forget bringing the English into the story. However, I think we can continue this conversation, and we will, because you and I get to talk to each other again tomorrow, which is nice. So hopefully we're going to continue the conversation. But I want to take a moment to also give the opportunity, if there's anyone in the audience who has a question at the back there. So I see 1, 2, 3. I was told one question at a time. This is not an academic seminar. I'm not sure about the mic. Does it roam? Can you just speak loudly? Or you just project?
This is a bit cheeky, but I have a suggestion for your next book.
Tell me.
Which is to find the spaces where these structures and barriers break down, because I do think they exist in South Africa in a way that they perhaps don't in other countries. And I want to give you an example of this. So I'm heteronormative. I'm a mother with 2 children, and I live very much in a white suburb with a white husband. But I want to tell you a little bit about my white husband, who in his 50s had a sort of midlife crisis and decided that he had to go and get fit and go running and all the rest of it. And so he ended up at a gym, and he now has a series of gym bros who are mostly black, who are mostly in their 20s, and he is the sort of uncle, of the group, and they all go running and gymming together. And so he really enjoys this engagement, and there's quite a interesting dynamic. He's sort of a successful businessman, and they are, forever reading self-help books and looking to him for advice. But, they explain a lot about their lives and their dynamics, which is, I hear the stories. So I do think, maybe it happens less in Cape Town, there are definitely spaces in Joburg where things have broken down. And I, as a woman, I feel, to some extent, I feel a bit jealous of him because I think he is able to cross those boundaries in a way that I, as a woman, feel less able to. So, I don't know.
That's very interesting. But yeah, Joburg is looking much better than Cape Town, so there's no question about it. So that is true, yeah.
Thank you. So we had a hand here.
I don't know how best to ask, but do you personally sometimes feel stuck in a situation that you find yourself surrounded with values that you don't necessarily agree with, and you desperately seek some kind of emancipation? Just tell me about your personal, because we all somewhat deal with that.
Absolutely, I feel constantly stuck, but also, and I'm complicit there also, because why am I still stuck in these spaces? But I feel in larger family structures, but also cultural, like the white Afrikaans culture is still an extremely sexist one, extremely racist one, homophobic one. So I feel constantly stuck. And then I'm complicit in the sense that I am still there and I'm not always speaking up. And I'm not trying to say everyone else is bad and I'm good. And there's also the question of how do we transcend structures that are, because we cannot just step out of these structures. That's also not possible. So I think the answer is in contributing in some way to their change, but it's the question of
education.
Yeah, yes. And then that's like a decades-long project. So it's very difficult I feel extremely stuck in my life in so many ways. I'm going to therapy this year is one of the big things I'm doing this year, just to also try to resolve some of these contradictions in myself also. So yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Freedom.
Yeah.
And then there was a hand there as well.
Yes, actually I'm a little bit lost because I've got 3 questions, just allowed to ask one so you can make a choice. So the first question is, how exclusive is your book? You wrote it in English, but it leads to an Afrikaans community. The second is, you write about white women as a woman. So what is the angle? Is it more as a woman or as a white person? Apart from the women, if you can do that apart. So, and the third question is, for me as an outsider in this community, I always see a big giant behind you, what you call desire. And I'm not sure, is the desire to go to heaven, as a white woman, so it's not so much about the man, but being a good woman. Is that actually the desire in the background, and then the sexual desire just comes out of this desire, even if God mostly is as a male person, keep that apart. So these would be my 3 questions. How big is the church in here?
Okay, so I'll only answer the third question because maybe other people have it too, and it's always a question around my books. One of my blind spots in my writing is religion, because I am not religious and I didn't grow up in a particularly religious way. So, and I know that's a big, of course I see around me what a big part religion plays in, but I struggle to write about it because I'm not. Yeah, so that is always a blind spot for me. But all I can say is that I think the Afrikaner culture mirrors the patriarchal structure of the Christian religion or some. Yeah, I would say, but it's a big question, and I don't want to open that Pandora's box here now. But yes, it's definitely something that plays a big role that I'm not exploring nearly enough. So. And then there.
Yeah, so if it's okay with you, can we take these last two questions and then have some wine, and I'm sure chat more. Yeah.
Wait.
So Yep.
So I think you did answer it a bit in your answer to Christi's last question. But I wanted to know how you deal with the uncertainty in the book, because from what you've said, the idea of using desire as kind of an opening or as a crossing is very compelling. But it still seems like we don't know if it's going to work, and I think scholars of colour here and in other parts of the world have said, with a lot of this work, we don't know if it is possible to have true relating across difference or true deep coalition building, given oppressive systems and things like that. And so I imagine the answer is probably just that deep colonial posture requires one to embrace the uncertainty, but it's really hard. So I wonder, how do you deal with the fact that we don't know if this will work, this world-making project will work, but you're putting it forward into the world anyways.
Yeah, and I think it's such a difficult thing also because at this moment in history, it feels like just now with Trump and all of it, like the gains of the feminist and queer and diversity movements are just being rolled back in weeks. So it does feel, I think whenever I start to think about real change and what I feel immediately discouraged almost and disheartened. So I think again, it's that complicated interplay between the personal and the structural, because for me, often it just comes down to how do I live my life, even if that doesn't change anything if we don't think structurally. But Sara Ahmed also writes about how the way in which we live our lives, if all of us are asking that question, then it does have a structural, it's not structural to think about how we live. So yeah, I think it's not a very satisfying answer, but I think if I think about long-term success of movements, then I'm just immediately discouraged of everything. So yeah, I don't know, but thanks.
And then you get the final say, I suppose, in a way.
I have a couple of questions. The first one is one born purely out of curiosity. At the beginning, and I think also in the book, you talk about writing it in an Afrikaner way. What does an Afrikaner register sound like? It's truly curiosity.
Okay.
Certain affects, sensibilities that you're drawing from, outside of anecdotes and stories about the life of a white Afrikaner woman. What does an Afrikaner boy sound like? My second question has to do with desire as the starting point for examining the implicatedness of race and gender and the white supremacist project in South Africa. What do we, or who do we unhuman by focusing on desire as a given? And so here I'm thinking about scholars of asexuality who have challenged compulsory sexuality, not just compulsory heterosexuality, but sexuality itself as a sort of fixed starting point for all of us. And then my final question is around, so in the book you have a story of going on a date with a black woman who's an activist, and then that going in a specific direction. So what comes after, and you talk a lot about this and becoming black and Kanam's work, you referenced a lot as well. So what comes after the realization that there are these sort of spaces, distances that cannot be crossed because of the realization of where we are differently located? And I then the question becomes also, we should have more sex with black people as white people. That can't be, that also doesn't really no. So what comes after that realization, after that exploration? Those are my questions. Thank you.
Wow. Okay, the first question about the Afrikaans register. So I asked, you can hear also in the way I speak, I sound very Afrikaans. I think it has to do also with the structuring of sentences and idiomatic use, which we just do wrongly. We use things in the wrong way. And yeah, totally. And I actually asked my editor, I had this very English southern suburbs Cape Town woman who's so English, who did the editing. And I asked her, can she keep kind of almost the wrongness of it. That's like sometimes word order we get wrong. We get lots of things, and we translate metaphors wrong. And she was actually, I thought she was going to tell me no, and then she was actually keen for it. So it's a lot of, it's maybe just bad English, but that's Afrikaans. So that would be that. And maybe also rhythm is a big part, because I think a lot about rhythm when I write, and Afrikaans has very specific rhythms, and we try to retain some of that in the prose. The question about using desire as a starting point and therefore potentially excluding people who do not engage with the world in an erotic or sexual way, you are right. I have not thought of that enough, or not at all, actually. So, I think that's something I must really think about, and maybe write an essay, or maybe you must write something on it, and then I can read it and learn something. So, but yes, definitely a blind spot for me, which I haven't thought about earlier, so thanks for that. I will be thinking about it. And then the question of, so one of the stories I tell in the book is where I go on a date with a black woman, and from the beginning it's just clear that this is not going anywhere because of how differently, there's an initial attraction, but when we start sharing about our lives, the gap is too big in terms of privilege, in terms of how we are spending our time, what we are interested in doing. And then the vignette's title is going nowhere. And I think these are the questions, but is it a cop-out if I say that just to have been on that date and to have had those conversations changed something in me? I don't know what it probably did nothing for her. So then it's that problematic thing again of the white woman, like using other people for her own becoming. So I know there's all of that. But maybe just for me, it's that date has stayed, and it's years ago, and I'm still thinking about it so much. So that desire that we met at the conference, we were having tea in between sessions, and desire sparked, and we went on an actual date and spent a whole day together, and that did open my world a bit. So then obviously there are lots of problematic things there, but I would say even there, just the fact of going there did something, at least for me, or taught me something about where I am. So again, maybe it is also problematic, but so I would say it's again, similar to the answer I gave to the previous question, it's about that thing of seeing how space opens up in new ways when you're willing to orient yourself in the direction of unexpected desires. And then the last thing you said about the answer is obviously not that we should just start sleeping with lots of black people. There's something wrong there too, to say that that's the answer. But to change the structure to really working at the structures of our society, of the spatiality, so that it's not that there's not such a big difference between, in the end, whether you end up in bed with a white person or the black person, that these things can happen more, that they can happen more easily, and that they don't have such massive implications every time. So it's also, for me, the work is also about changing the very real spatiality and structures of our society so that our sex lives can start meaning new things and looking differently in ways that, so it's again that tension between the structural change and individual choice. I don't know if that answers anything, but that would be my attempt. Okay, I guess
thanks so much, Azille. I would say that, I want to say thank you for writing this and putting it out. I think it's an almost infantilizing thing that we say to women, to say it's a very brave book. But I think, you and I spoke earlier in the car about the and I guess that's also underpinned in this book, the labor that women do. And I think the kind of vulnerability that you put into this book by weaving yourself in so intimately is a kind of unseen and underappreciated labor that I think comes from your own positionality. So thank you. A reminder to please go buy the book. Azille will sign it for you, I think.
Yeah.
And thank you so much. Congratulations. It's a fabulous book.
Thanks, Christi, and thanks everyone.
Both of you, and Azille will stay here and do some.
Okay.
I'll give you a glass of wine.
And a pen, please. Thank you.